Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to League Analysis. I'm Handygamer, and this is the third part of my draft analysis series where I will be discussing the world's semifinal between SKT and RNG and their drafts. You probably have checked out the first two parts already. If you haven't, I highly recommend to go back and revisit them because for example, in the first part, I'll be talking about the jungle trifecta that I see in the current world's meta, which will have a huge impact on the draft phases of the semifinals. And in the second video that I made, I am discussing the draft priorities, which I have put up here again as a brief reminder for those who watched my first and second video already. Just to give a brief summary, RNG's game plan is to win the games during the mid game. They want to unlock Uzi with, for example, the top lane Shen, get picks going with Sejuani and protect him with the Janna. In terms of what Xiaohu is playing, he's pretty flexible, so those are the champs that you have to watch out for. They want to deny Huni's Jace, so that's a perma ban. On the opposite side, SKT, after the first game where they didn't ban away the Janna and the Shen, they will now, for the second game of the series, reiterate their focuses, their priorities. They will stick to the Galio because their game plan is to get to a phase where their superior decision making as a whole, as a team, can actually shine and enable them to win the game. So what they are looking for is have the superior macro movement, which requires Huni to have a winning lane matchup, and they want to drag the game out even further, such that their superior decision making in late game team fights enables them to just grind out and win the game in the late game. Obviously, they have to stop Uzi from going wild throughout the game, but they could as well decide to focus on getting Bang ahead instead. And in this second game, they kind of switch from the first and move towards the second. As you recall, in the first game, we saw Blitzcrank as an attempt to shut down Uzi. And now let's just take a look what they are trying to achieve in the second game. Now, the bans from both teams are pretty much standard in terms of what their priorities are, what they consider very strong picks, and what they have to ban out because of the champion pool that their players are playing. Dorban, I discussed why this ban will always happen for SKT when they start blank in the first game, and I think if you're still interested in seeing that because you have skipped it, go back and watch that. Sejuani, still in terms of her strength in the current metagame, as I discussed in the jungle trifecta video, very strong pick, and thus RNG decide to ban it away. They aren't really sure as to what Blank might actually playing because he played Zac in the first game, so I think it's pretty reasonable to leave the Gragas open. But I think they just give such a super high priority to Sejuani that they don't want to give it away in first rotation, even though I think SKT wouldn't have opted to pick it anyways. Same as the Tristana ban that we see from SKT. They value that pick pretty highly, they ban it away, even though I would argue that RNG aren't necessarily looking to pick up the Tristana themselves. Anyways, SKT continue with their high Galio pick priority. First pick, no surprise there. RNG go for the Twitch again, and as I mentioned in the first video, Xayah Rakan, very high priority for RNG to prevent SKT from picking up that bot lane. So they, after banning away Jace and the Sejuani, now end up picking the Rakan. I think their mentality going into the draft was that Sejuani had the highest priority in terms of overall picks for them, and Jace had the highest ban priority as a whole, so that they are left on the red side with having to ban Kalista, but also the option to pick Rakan for Ming in order to prevent SKT from drafting the Xayah Rakan bot lane. SKT now take the Gragas for blank. I think that's a pretty reasonable pick to make at this point because he's the last jungler from the jungle trifecta left at this point, and they opt for the Varus. I think this one is also aimed at potentially locking down Uzi with his Twitch, because as a Twitch, if you go for the spray and pray, you kind of make for somewhat of an easy target for the Varus ultimate. And I think in terms of overall power of the AD carry champion itself, the Varus, not just his ultimate, I think he's doing pretty fine in the current meta game. I haven't actually checked the win rates, but I think just from a gut feeling, he's not like the main carry in any of the games that he's playing, but he's enabling the remainder of his team to shine, and I think that's something that Bang is aiming to do, even more so than in the first game where he wasn't really given any tools to carry. Now he is obviously more of a tool himself to enable his team to carry while still delivering enough damage for a potential frontline. So I think it's at that point it's pretty pretty decent to pick up the Varus. Obviously, there is still hyper carries like Kog'Maw available that you could have also taken at this point, but up until now, SKT hasn't really shown that they want to play around Bang, and thus they just pick the Varus and say, okay, just play a supportive kind of play style and clean up whatever's left. Jahu now returns to his Malzahar. He's been doing fine against SKT's team composition in the first game. Now they have drafted a similar kind of style. They have again the Galio in the mid lane where Malzahar is doing fine. The passive of Malzahar is also pretty insane against the Varus ultimate. You don't have to sidestep it necessarily. You can just take it without being locked down. So that's also pretty fine. I think both teams can be pretty can feel pretty comfortable with their draft up until this point. Now it starts to get interesting because I think SKT have adapted in terms of their drafting, while RNG still have no clue what the fuck is actually going on here. RNG obviously decide to ban away, I think, what they consider potential counter picks to Malzahar in the mid lane. Thinking that maybe SKT might flex the Galio topside because they have doing a pretty good job at dealing with the Galio in the first game of the series. So they invest 2 bans into potential mid laners because I think if you wanted to target ban a support Karma here, it doesn't really make that much sense. I would have assumed that given the prevalence of Lulu in the current metagame, they would have opted to ban away the Lulu instead if they were actually targeting the support champion pool. So Karma ban, definitely more of a mid lane ban at this point. And obviously SKT, as we will now know looking back, we're never gonna vary with their mid lane Galio. They will just take the Galio, run it mid lane, and thus the 2 bans of RNG again kind of whiff. And I think throughout the entire series, you will see that RNG didn't really have a strong idea as to what their 4th and 5th ban might actually be, and that's why in quite a number of games you can see these 2 bans not really do that much. On the opposite side, SKT go for 2 very strong bans. They remove the Cho'Gath as they did in the first game, and as I discussed previously, they also removed the Shen to take it away from Let Me. Let Me has proven in the first game that he's pretty good on that champion, and their answer of the Gangplank didn't really work out, so they remove the Shen and say, okay, screw this. We'll just counterpick whatever. Let Me will lock in now. Let Me now decides to go for the Gnar, thinking that if he doesn't take the Gnar himself, but instead goes for a tanky top laner, then Huni might just revert to the Gnar, counterpick him, and do pretty fine. Instead, what's happening now is Huni's picking up the Camille, countering the Gnar, and having a pretty fine matchup here. And lastly, Wolf now takes the Fervor Leona that Misfits were using to great success against SK Telecom in their quarterfinal. And I think that's some of the things that SKT had prepared coming into this semifinal. These seemingly wacky support picks just to maybe get 1 or 2 wins through those kind of strange picks without revealing too much, because it's just like potentially even just a preparation for the finals, showing that, well, in case you go for a certain composition, we have these counters prepared for you, so you better watch out. Leona against Twitch is actually pretty bonkers because, again, you have an immobile AD carry, as you often have in this metagame. You have the Varus to pressure him in terms of CC. You have now the Leona to lock him down even further. You have, like, I don't know, if you manage to land 1 CC, you have a CC chain of like 6 seconds or something, or even more, on a single target. And at least post level 6, and that's why Uzi will be facing a lot of pressure throughout the game. And I don't think that Ming's Rakan is really equipped to deal with the aggression, especially I think you see SKT go very aggressive very early on in the game, where Rakan doesn't really have the tools yet to simply go for a counter engage himself. And that's how SKT managed to kind of start snowballing the bot side and have some kill pressure there, which they were trying to look for in the last game but didn't really manage to get it. And now they are looking for it in a different kind of way. And now we start to see what will be a reoccurring theme throughout the entire draft, and that is a wacky last pick for RNG. I'm not sure if they prepared the Nocturne, I'm not sure if they are practiced on it enough, but outside of the 3 trifecta champions, MLXG's performance on these other junglers wasn't really that amazing, especially if you consider the kind of champion that he plays and what it kind of does for his team. Nocturne doesn't really fit the team's playstyle because while you want to close out the game early and go for aggressive jungle plays, Nocturne himself isn't really doing anything prior to level 6, so you have to, like the Gigabyte Marines did in their win with Nocturne, have to fund a lot of resources into the Nocturne, such as lane swapping and using your top laner to accelerate Nocturne's clear, give him additional income in form of early game ganks or dives, and additional farm in the lanes. I think in their game against Fnatic, Gigabyte Marines managed to snowball their Nocturne to the fastest level 6 ever at a world stage. And that's what you kind of need to do with Nocturne in order to pull him off successfully. And if you take a look at what RNG has drafted, they don't really have much to offer in terms of actually helping the Nocturne do his job. If you take a look at the top lane, the top lane would be supposed to roam around with the jungler and feed him experience and gold and jungle camps while the lane swap is taking place. And I think that's almost literally the opposite of what Gnar is supposed to do in early stages of the game. Gnar is supposed to abuse his long-range auto attacks during the laning phase to pull ahead of his opposing top laner and kind of bully him out of lane, have the potential for a lot of damage if a CC jungler shows up to gank his lane. So he has some kill threat as well, might even go for tower dives with his Mega Gnar, and you can't really achieve that if you're falling too far behind relative to the overall game state with the Gnar. Obviously, Camille wouldn't really prefer being in a split push scenario either, but I think you need the Gnar to be the frontliner for your team, so you need him to have enough items with, so that you can actually team fight and not just go for pickoffs. However, going for pickups is something that Xiaohu obviously wants to try to do, so together with the Malzahar, I think the Nocturne is somewhat justifiable, but on the bot side there is a lane where Nocturne can't really gank himself. Obviously, he has a certain counter ganking potential, but then again, the only thing you might end up getting in a counter gank scenario is you get another long cooldown like the Flash of Varus or the Explosive Cask of the Gragas for your ultimate. And I think that's not what you're looking for as Nocturne. You want to use your ultimate to actually get some kills. You can obviously try to use it in the mid lane, but there you have the Galio, who's going to be really tanky at like the mid game already, and thus I think Nocturne simply doesn't have too many targets that he can opt to go for. Obviously, you still try to match the semi-global global presence of the Galio, but Galio's ultimate is pretty good at countering the ultimate of Nocturne. So if Nocturne goes for a gank, Galio can simply counter it. And the same isn't true the other way around, because if Galio joins a fight and then later on Nocturne joins, well, guess what? Galio has still both a lot of tankiness and a lot of CC to counter the Nocturne. So I think in terms of what the champion's abilities offer, Nocturne is just not the right choice here in this specific draft. RNG end up lacking a frontline that is actually capable of dealing with, say, Camille jumping in, locking them down, having enough staying power to deal with the Galio. I mean, Faker can simply go for taunt flashes all the time, because no matter whom he hits, they will all die, and there's no one zoning away the rest of his team except for maybe Let Me, but Let Me gets shut down in lane by the Camille. So there's more or less not much left for RNG to do unless they really snowball the early game. And now to summarize what the draft is looking like in terms of my perspective, compared to the draft priorities that the teams are looking for. SKT have managed to get a winning top lane. They have managed to get a bot lane that has an easier time applying pressure compared to the first game. The Leona and the Varus have more kill threat, and it's easier for them to lock down the enemy than the Blitzcrank was trying to do in the first game. You have a better jungler for Blank, one where he can both apply pressure on the lanes and disengage unfavorable team fights with. So that's great. SKT have marked all their checkboxes, even though the picks themselves aren't really the strongest that are available in the current meta. Their team composition fits their playstyle, and they kind of managed to achieve what they were looking for. On the opposite side, RNG have a lot of engaged potential. They have the Gnar jumping in, going for a Gnar. They have the Malzahar ultimate to go for single targets. They have Twitch to follow up on all that. But it requires them to actually get somewhere during the laning phase. And as I kind of mentioned, top lane is going SKT's way, both in terms of the matchup and I think the knowledge of the two players in this matchup, because I think Let Me isn't really on one of his comfort champions. Gnar isn't really his kind of playstyle, whereas Huni is playing to his strengths. MLXG has the potential to pull off an amazing Nocturne performance if he gets a really strong game where he's really showing up, but his appearances at this Worlds have really been hit or miss. And Nocturne is a very, very extreme case of Feast or Famine champion. And thus, I would argue RNG is rolling the dice here with their team composition. they can obviously still win with this team composition, but it's much harder to accomplish than what SKT has drafted, and that's, I think, how the tables are flipped in comparison to the first game, where SKT had the harder to execute team composition, the one with the harder to achieve win conditions, and now RNG are facing an uphill battle in that kind of sense. Still, they could easily snowball this out of control, so it will come down to mid-game team fights, who's pulling out ahead, who's getting the catches, if there are any catches to be made, and if Blank with his explosive cast can reset fights after RNG's surprise initiation with the Nocturne and the Twitch or not. Overall, as I said, SKT from my perspective come out ahead, easier to execute, and more fitting to their playstyle of what they're trying to look for, trying to achieve. And that's it for the second game. Thanks for watching, thanks for tuning in. As I said in the previous videos, this is a video series. There will be a total of 6 videos, one with the jungle trifecta and then 5 for the 5 different games for the series between SKT and RNG, so make sure to check out the others if you've enjoyed watching, and see you guys in the next videos. Bye.